guys, so it's Miss Wesley and we're going to talk about finding angles today. So last skill was finding sides. Now we're going to figure out how do you find a missing angle using trig ratio still, but this time when given two sides. So take a second to copy your essential question down, and I'm going to walk you through the process, and thankfully it's very similar to what we've already been doing. So we're going to essentially follow the same steps we have before. There's just one little difference that's going to come into play when we find angles. And something to make sure, and hopefully you've already checked this at this point, but just another reminder, you need to make sure your calculator is in degree mode anytime you're doing any type of trig problem. So you want to, if you're not sure how to check the mode, call Miss Griffin or myself over and we'll walk you through it. But you need to make sure you're in degree mode so you get the correct answer. So here we go. First example. It says solve for the missing angle to the nearest degree. So meaning we're going to round our answer to the nearest whole number. So just like we did before, we're going to say, okay, I'm going to stand at my angle. So here's our missing angle. From that angle's perspective, I need to label my sides. Well, opposite of that angle is going to be my 20. Hypotenuse is always across from my right angle, and then my leftover side here is going to be adjacent. So I have everything labeled, and I'm going to make sure I write out my trig ratios so don't forget them. Sine, cosine, that should be an H. I know it looks like an A. Let's see if I can fix it. And tan. All right, let's try and go back and erase this one. We'll make that more clearly an H. There we go. All right, so step 1 is done. Wrote out my trig ratios. Step 2, circle the angle. Step 3, labeled OA and H. And I know I did those kind of in the wrong order, so I apologize. So now that we have everything set up, and again, I'm going to focus on this angle because that's the one I'm trying to find. We know the O and we know the H. So that's going to lead me to pick sine, O and H. So if I write this out now, I'm going to say sine, and instead of question mark, I'm just going to call this an X. Equals, well, I know the opposite side is 20, and I know the hypotenuse is 38. So we're trying to find x. So here's my ratio. You might be saying, well, Miss Wesley, let's cross multiply. Well, the problem with that is if we cross multiply, this x here is still going to be stuck inside of sine. So think about it like if you were squaring something and you need to undo that square, you would do what's called the square root. They're called inverse operations. So we have to do the same thing here. If we're trying to find x, and x is an angle, it's stuck inside of this sine function right now. That's how I like to say it. So if we need to get x alone, we need to do the opposite of sine, which is sine inverse. It's sine with this little -1. And all you do is you move down your fraction into your ratio. So what happens here is the x is now by itself, and you have to do the inverse of sine. So what we just did here is you apply the inverse. Because again, I need to do the opposite of sine to get sine by itself. So the opposite of sine is sine inverse. And at this point, you're going to type this into your calculator. Type into calculator. And where you find the sine inverse is if you hit that trig button again, notice that across the top row it went sine, cosine, tangent. Bottom row goes sine inverse, cos inverse, tan inverse. So pick sine inverse, then type in your fraction 20 divided by 38, hit enter, and we will be left with x equals 31.7569. And again, if I look back up at my question here, I said round to the nearest degree though, so meaning I need nearest whole number. So if I look next to the 1, I'm going to see a 7, so that 7 is going to round up this angle here to be 32 degrees. And that's how you find an angle. Alright, so let's take a look at the second example to kind of make this process a little bit more concrete for you, and then we'll look at one word problem, that's it. Alright, so let's scroll down here to example 2. And it says, find the value of the missing angle to the nearest hundredth. So we're going to look for this angle down here. All right, so we're going to put ourselves in that angle's perspective. I'm going to say, okay, from that angle, the 4 is my opposite side. Across from the right angle would be the H, which we don't know. And the 15 is my leftover side. It's right next to where I'm standing, so that's my adjacent side. So at this point, I'm going to write out my ratios. Sine cosine, and tangent. Now if I look at the information here, I have O and I have A. Well, O and A means we should be using tangent. So I'm going to set up my ratio to say, okay, tan of x equals O, which is 4, over A, which is 15. And again, just like before here, I'm trying to find x, which is standing for an angle. It's saying tan of x. So in order for me to get x by itself here, I have to do the opposite of tan, which is tan inverse. And once you get this far, this is what you type in your calculator. So hit your trig button, hit tan inverse, 4 divided by 15. When you hit enter, you will be looking at 14.93, what is that, 14? If we go back up and look at our rounding directions, this said round to the nearest hundredth, not hundred, hundredth, which means the second decimal place. So if I'm standing at 3 and I look next door, that 1 isn't going to do anything to my answer. So our final answer here is going to be 14.93. And there you go, another angle found. So hopefully you're catching on to this process. Like I said, each time, if you're not, call Miss Griffin or myself over. We're going to take a look at one last word problem, and then that's it for this video. So here we go, example 3. A cardinal is sitting on the ground approximately 21.4 feet from the base of a tree. So just in that first sentence, I know the distance from the cardinal to the tree is 21.4, so I'm going to label that 21.4. Make sure my decimal shows up. If we keep reading, it says the tree is 18.5 feet high. So we know the height of the tree here is 18.5. My 5's going to get cut off. It says, determine the angle of elevation at which the bird must fly to reach the top of the tree, round to the nearest degree. So the first thing I want to point out to you here is angle of elevation. There's two different types of angles you can find. Angle of elevation, and there's something called the angle of depression. So the angle of elevation is when you look out and up. So meaning you look out, and then from that out you look up, so your angle would be here. Whereas the angle of depression is you look out, but then you look down, so that the angle of depression would be here. So we're going to look at some word problems that include both of those. But for right now, we're looking for the angle of elevation, so meaning the angle we're looking for is going to be right there. So I'm going to put a little X in that spot. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Let's try that again. X, and that spot. There we go. All right, so now we go through our traditional process. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm the cardinal right now. We're standing where the cardinal is. And from the cardinal's perspective, opposite would be the tree. So that's my 18.5. The hypotenuse would be the path the bird would have to fly, which we don't know. And adjacent is how far away the cardinal is from the tree, because again, the tree and the ground make a right angle. So at this point, I'm going to write out my trig ratio so I can remember which one to pick. So, Toa, some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. That should be an H. So if we look at our picture here, we know the opposite side, we know the adjacent side. So O and A is going to lead me to pick tangent. So if we set up our ratio, tan of my angle, so I'm going to say X, equals O, which is 18.5, over A, which is 21.4. Again, we're looking for an angle though, and that X right now is stuck with the tangent. So in order to get X by itself, I have to do the opposite of tan, which is tan inverse of 18.5 over 21.4. That you're going to type right into your calculator. And when we do, we're going to get 40.8, what do I got there? 4295. This said round to the nearest degree, so meaning nearest whole number. So I'm looking at my 40. Next door is an 8, so that's going to bump this up to 41 degrees. All right. So that's how you might see this with a word problem. So the last thing I'm going to have you jot down for me here, guys, is just a little side note, because this can get confusing now that we've talked about different types of angles and stuff. So the one thing I want you to write down is we only, and you can write this below, if I scroll, all the writing's going to go with me, it's going to be annoying. So only use inverse when finding an angle. All right, so the only time you're going to hit that inverse button like we have here is when you're actually finding an angle. If you are finding a side, you do not use the inverse button. We do the same process we did before. So it's only when you're finding an angle do you have to get that angle by itself, which is going to cause you to use the inverse button. All right, so take a look at the practice and then work your way to the CFU, and then next time you'll see Miss Griffin and you'll be working on some word problems. Over and out.